So Death Row is now taking off.
Right.
Platinum album after platinum album
Right.
after platinum album.
Right.
You know, The Chronic, Doggy Style, Dog Food, the Above the Rim soundtrack. Like
Right.
it just kept going. Murder Was the Case soundtrack. It was just everything they touched.
Tupac comes.
Tupac comes.
Yeah.
And then Dre and Suge start to not really get along the way they used to. Were you still in contact with Suge during this time?
Not much, but I knew about the conflict was Dre didn't want to be around all those criminals.
Yeah.
Okay, I mean, because Dre, you know, part of I think the attraction is that neither Dre nor Suge were street guys, right? So therefore they got along. Suge begins to bring all the street guys around. Dre didn't want to be around them, and eventually it got to the point where Dre just stopped doing anything. And, you know, the producer, so like all the stuff, you know, outside of like California Love, most of the stuff that Tupac did was done by Johnny Jackson.
Yeah.
You know, because Dre just stopped producing.
Yeah.
You know, you can almost see if you look at the work that was done by Death Row, you can almost see Dre, then no Dre.
Yeah.
And even for a lot of the things where Dre still got credit, he wasn't the producer. There were other younger guys.
Daz and
Right.
all these guys.
And so Dre just kind of absented himself from the process and refused to do anything. And so when I talked to Suge said, oh man, Dre is lazy, he won't come to the studio, he won't finish anything. But I got these other young guys who I think are just as good or better that are making my records.
Right. And then Tupac came in the picture, and it took Death Row to a whole other level.
On another level.
Yeah. So then Dre leaves Death Row.
I think he left it mentally and, you know, long before he actually left legally.
Okay. And Jimmy Iovine ends up, from what I understand, giving Dre a chunk of money and basically financing Aftermath.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I think the idea was, again, I haven't seen the legal documents, but the idea was, okay, Dre, I'll buy you out of Death Row. And let me take care of the problems. There's no lawsuit. I'll take care of Dre, and then, you know, you and I be doing business.
Okay. So now Dre is gone.
Mm-hmm.
Death Row is thriving.
Mm-hmm.
Tupac and Snoop are both the twin towers
Right.
of Death Row.
Right.
And then the Vegas incident happens. So the fight breaks out in the MGM lobby.
Right.
And Suge is on camera kicking Orlando.
Right.
Now you said that he did it just to save face.
That's what I think.
What does that mean?
What it means is I got a bunch of guys I'm the leader of. They're real thugs. You know, I cannot punk out and not do something with these guys and have them follow me.
Okay.
So if you look at the video, as I looked at the video, yeah, he kicked him, but it wasn't the kind of, he wasn't stomping him, and it was like he was kicking at him, which was enough to say, yeah, man, I kicked that motherfucker like the rest of it, but he really, in my view, it wasn't really like he was smashing him. It was more like he was making sure I'm the leader of the pack.
Right after the incident, Suge's car with Tupac gets shot up. Suge gets hit in the head. Tupac
Gets assassinated.
Gets killed. I mean, ultimately, he ends up dying from the injuries
Right.
in that situation. And then because of that kick, Suge ends up violating that parole from
Right.
years ago.
Right. That puts him in jail.
over the shooting incident.
Right.
Now Suge goes to jail. He gets sentenced to 9 years,
Right.
which he ended up serving 5.
Right.
Are you still in contact with Suge during this time?
Yeah, I went to prison to see him. Because, you know, we actually, during this period of time, Dick sued Suge.
Right.
And
But not Solar Records. It was Dick.
yeah,
Okay.
Dick sued Suge. And they actually did a deposition in jail. He was up in Lompoc. So I went up to Lompoc. on a few occasions with Dick to see Suge. I mean, even though Dick had sued him, it was not, how do I say, it was an adversarial lawsuit, but they weren't adversaries.
Okay.
You know, it was you know, and so I went over with Dick to see Suge a couple times. I think I may have gone to see Suge without Dick even.
Okay.
And that lawsuit eventually got settled. I don't think it went to trial.
Okay. Do you know how much it got settled for?
It was in the millions.
Well, then at one point, Lydia Harris, which is Harry O's wife,
Or ex-wife
sued.
now, right.
Yeah, ex-wife. Sued Suge as well, or sued Death Row.
Sued Death Row, yeah.
And won.
Right. But she won what I would say on a technicality. Never went to trial.
Huh.
I think judgment was imposed because they failed to respond to discovery, is what I recall.
Aha. Do you know how much she won?
Ooh, it was huge amount of money. Don't remember the numbers, but it was in the tens of millions of dollars.
So now Death Row is crumbling. Everyone is leaving. I mean,
Right.
because Dre left first, but then Snoop leaves, Corrupt leaves,
Right.
Daz eventually leaves.
Right.
He tries to bring in some new artists like Crooked Eye, but it's not reacting
No.
to what he came out with the Chronic 2000 himself right before Dre did it and did a
Right.
bunch of what I
Right.
felt was petty type things. But Death Row is basically on its way out.
It was way out. Yeah.
And then it ends up just filing bankruptcy, and
It filed bankruptcy.
then it gets sold to some other company.
It filed bankruptcy. Originally, it was going to be a reorganization. The bankruptcy was precipitated by the $107 million judgment that Lydia got. And so filed bankruptcy, and originally the idea was to do a reorganization. The trustee in bankruptcy ended up having a problem with Suge. He thought Suge wasn't being honest with him with all the things he was doing. And so it turned into a straight bankruptcy.
Okay. Doesn't Suge but still own certain things after this, or not really? No, that's
All of the assets.
right. Because I think Tupac's mom ended up suing as well and won that, and
Well, there was a whole separate thing with Tupac that was before the bankruptcy.
okay,
What had happened is, Tupac had been an Interscope artist. They didn't know what to do with him. And so, as you may or may not recall, Tupac had gotten shot up in New York, and he was in jail, and he wanted to get out.
Suge bailed him out.
Suge bailed him out, and he actually signed a contract when he was in jail.
Yeah.
Kenner wrote out it was a handwritten contract that Tupac signed, and the deal was that he was going to give 3 albums to Death Row. So
And Interscope was okay with this because
Interscope was okay with it.
Yeah.
Because they were distributing Death Row. They couldn't get anything out of Tupac. And it was like, Suge is doing something that's bringing us money. So when Tupac got out, I think Suge was on probation. And he had rented a house with a studio out in the valley, Can-Am. And so Tupac went to the studio, and until he died, all he did was record.
Yeah.
He just recorded constantly. And by the way, while Suge was out there, he had what I think was an incredible library, because once Suge had developed this reputation and people came to town, his tax was, you got to come out and record a song for me. Otherwise, you're going to have problems with me. So he's got...
So Suge was basically telling out-of-town artists that when they came to LA, they had to come record with him or else there would be problems.
Right. And so they did.
Okay.
So So the Death Row Library had, you think of an artist, Jay-Z, Mary J. Blige. He's got tracks by all these artists that had come out and cut something for him, and when he went into bankruptcy, they had something like 10,000 masters that were in storage, a lot of them unreleased. I mean, things like with TLC and
Right,
and
Left Eye.
Biggie. I was saying, everybody came to town. They would come and record something.
Wow.
So it's an incredible library of stuff that was recorded. Now you still have the issues about do you have the right to release it? That's another issue. But the fact was they got all this stuff recorded. So Tupac recorded way more than three albums, and there's probably a hole in the agreement that they did, because typically you do a recording agreement with an artist. The contract provides that everything you record during the term, the record company owns. Mm-hmm. That provision wasn't in the Tupac agreement. So even though he recorded a lot of stuff, it was not owned by Death Row.
Okay.
So the lawsuit after Tupac's death had to do with unreleased masters that were in the possession of Death Row, and the claim was those come to the estate, they're not owned by Death Row.
Gotcha.
So they eventually settled that lawsuit, and Afeni did a deal with Interscope to distribute the records, and Interscope agreed that they would pay Suge an override on the records that they distributed.
Okay.
That Afeni got.
Okay.
So that's how they kept all the Tupac stuff at Interscope.